Welcome back to the Love Your People Well podcast, episode 211. And we are going to continue today looking at passive aggressive communication in your homes, but we're going to get really practical. This podcast is all about helping you build healthy, happy, and holy family relationships. They're a lot happier without passive aggressive communication. They are a lot healthier, and they are definitely a lot holier. If you really want to enjoy a happy marriage and you want to enjoy your kids, we all know that passive aggressive communication is not the way to go. But it can be really easy to get sucked into bad habits. And so today I want to share 6 strategies that are really going to help you stop any patterns, whether they are small or big, new or old, of passive aggressive communication in your home. Now, if this is your first time here tuning into the podcast, my name is Jess, and I am a marriage and family therapist. There have been many a conversation with couples, especially who are struggling with different types of communication that ultimately boil down to passiveness or aggressiveness, or that lovely combination of passive aggressiveness. And we talked last week a little bit about some examples that you might have listened and even felt a little discouraged hearing examples that sound familiar to your home life. And it is definitely not my goal to be discouraging here, but to normalize the reality that this happens, even for couples who love each other, even for those of us who are passionately loving and serving Jesus. Communication can be tough and emotions can be overwhelming. And so today we're going to get real practical to figure out together how do we stop any of those patterns that we really need to kick to the curb. And so I'm bringing in some of that knowledge and history from my work as a counselor, but also I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I have 4 kids ages 4 and under, and the emotions are real. The communication issues can be big. And I'm excited for this conversation. Also, just as a reminder to myself of how I want to be and need to be communicating with my people. So I'm confident it will be helpful for you as well. And last week we looked at a scripture from Colossians 3, focusing in on the call that we should not lie to each other, but we should be putting on the new self, renewed in knowledge in the image of our Creator. And today I want to look at a similar passage, but it's coming from the letter to the Ephesians, in Ephesians chapter 4. And what it says is, therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor. For we are all members of one body. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. So that's from Ephesians 4. And I think it connects so clearly with issues around passive aggressive communication, because like we talked about last week, passive aggressiveness is ultimately, it's a lie. You're feeling one emotion, and instead of being honest about that, instead of talking that through, instead of sometimes even acknowledging that you're struggling with something, we're brushing it under the rug, we're pretending it's not there. It's a lie. It's falsehood. It is definitely not building a connection with our husband and with our kids. And when we are dishonest about things, I mean, the Lord knows our hearts, and the Lord is gracious and He is forgiving. But it is sinful to lie, to hold things back. Some of the examples we talked about last week, like sarcasm, or saying you're going to do something for someone and then not doing it because you're just, I'm mad at you, and so I'm going to try to make your life a little bit less pleasant, a little bit less easy, instead of dealing with the fact that I'm angry at you or annoyed with you. These are sinful actions. They are not making us happy. They are not strengthening our family dynamics. And I really like how this passage in Ephesians highlights this call that we should not let the sun go down while we're still angry. We should not give the devil a foothold. In passive aggressive communication, more often than not, it's building over time. That's not to say it can't just happen here and there occasionally because maybe you're overwhelmed by a certain emotion or you're struggling with something. But generally speaking, the sooner that we can be honest with our people, talk things through, lay things out, we're protecting from giving the devil a foothold of bitterness, of unforgiveness, of counting up the wrongs against one another. The sooner that we're dealing with things, the sooner we can get back to enjoying that family relationship, our marriage, or our relationship with our kids. And so this is such a helpful scripture, and it's going to point us toward some of these strategies that I want to talk through with now. But I want to acknowledge before we jump into things to do, action steps that we can all try, I want to acknowledge a little bit about why it is that so many of us can start using passive aggressive communication. Because I won't speak for you, but I'll speak for everyone I've ever sat in a counseling room with, and I'll speak for myself, and I'll speak for my friends. We don't want this to define our marriage or our home life. We don't want to be passive aggressive. We all know that that's not good. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't make us happy. It's not healthy. And yet, sometimes we wind up living out some of the examples that we talked through last week. Sometimes it's accidental. Sometimes we're just overwhelmed by an emotion. And so when we think about, well, how did I get into this mess in the first place? That's a really helpful question to ask. Hopefully it's a small mess, but sometimes it's big and sometimes it's damage has happened. And being able to think through, how did I get here? Why is this happening? Can be really helpful for figuring out which strategy or action step is going to give me the biggest bang for my buck, which is going to have the biggest impact for me and my marriage, for you and your marriage, your family life today. And so one of the biggest things, the main thing I want to highlight as far as why we sometimes fall into this pattern is if we're feeling uncomfortable with our current emotion or uncomfortable about expressing that emotion. Because it can be hard to feel angry. It can be awkward to talk about hurt feelings. We're often uncomfortable with the emotion, the experience of it. It's overwhelming us. We don't know what to do, or uncomfortable with talking about it, figuring out how do I do that? How do I feel safe to do that? And then the other side of that, that sometimes we're uncomfortable with the fear that we have of how is the other person going to react. If I actually do tell them I'm upset about this, or I try to have this conversation, we're trying to avoid the conflict, make everybody happy. Nobody wants to trigger an argument. Nobody wants to watch another temper tantrum from their kids. And so there definitely are times where it really boils down to, well, why am I doing this? Usually it's I'm uncomfortable with some part of this process, either with the emotion itself, with the idea of expressing it, talking about it, or with my fear about how you might respond to it. And you might be uncomfortable with all three of those things, or one of those might really jump out to you more than the other. But as we think through these 6 strategies today, these 6 tips for how you can stop being passive aggressive, it will help if you have a sense of why it is that you find yourself acting or communicating in this way when you probably don't want to and you're trying not to. So the more that we can be honest at the beginning with our own feelings, that sets us up for a lot more success. And so that is my first tip here as we think about how do I stop any patterns, any examples of passive aggressive communication. You need to notice your feelings and then pause. Just hit the pause button. The sun might be going up, the sun might be going down. We don't give the devil a foothold because if we're pausing, then we're not letting that emotion determine my next step. So just noticing it. You don't have to have the right word for it or label of, oh, this is what I'm feeling. Oh, this is what's happening. If you notice that kind of gut reaction, ooh, I feel hurt by that, or I feel frustrated about this, just pause instead of responding. And I don't mean pause like, I'll push that under the rug and just say, oh, everything's fine, and then I'll come back to it later. um, there might be a response that's needed depending on, if you're in the middle of a conversation or you're in the middle of the grocery store and your kid is asking for something. But noticing that feeling, and if you have the time and you're able to, then yeah, pause so that you can think it through, you can pray about it, you can figure out what really is going on, what do I want to say, how could I say that best. If you can't, just take that time or jump into that next step in a more healthy and honest way. You can tell the other person that you're pausing. You can tell your husband, I really do want to talk about this with you, but I got to figure out what I'm feeling. You're asking me, am I fine? I know I'm not fine, but I don't know exactly what I am, or I don't know exactly what I need. I'm going to circle back to you with that. And you can maybe practice some ways of saying that feel normal for you. Practicing in front of the mirror is going to feel awkward, but it's really going to help you in the heat of the moment. But that is really a, a first level step, is notice what you're feeling and pause. Try to not just move forward, again, brush it under the rug or give that sarcastic response or say something that's not true. Take the time, if you can, to think it through, pray it through, figure it out, or tell the other person that, I'm struggling, but I don't have all of my thoughts together about it. I don't know all my emotions about it. So notice your feelings and pause. A second tip that's going to help here is to practice using emotion words, right? So that first thing, okay, if I'm uncomfortable with what I'm feeling, I just have to notice it and pause. Don't let that emotion determine my next step. But also, if I'm uncomfortable, maybe with the emotion itself, maybe with talking about it, practice labeling your feelings, putting words to the emotions, practice saying it out loud, and that's going to help move you toward healthier communication. Now, yes, eventually you want to be practicing with your husband or with your kids, but your starting point is probably going to be prayer and journaling, maybe talking with a friend, talking with a counselor, talking with a pastor, standing in front of the mirror, like I said before, but figuring out some labels that make sense. Am I feeling angry or am I feeling irritated? Those are related, but they're not the same. And trying to figure that out, practicing using that language more, is going to build that comfort level with using those emotion words in the moment. When your husband is saying, hey, are you okay? And you are definitely not okay, but you're tempted to give that kind of classic, oh, sure, I'm fine response, which is not building up connection and intimacy with your husband. You'll have more skill and comfort there with labeling your emotions, recognizing them, understanding them, labeling them. So start with prayer, start with journaling. Over on the website, loveyourpeoplewell.com/journaling, you can download a free resource with some great journaling prompts for Christian moms, and that's a really helpful resource. But just start thinking it through and practicing with those emotion words. And my third tip here, kind of, these are all building on each other. You might notice that. Do I notice my feeling and pause? Am I practicing those emotion words? And then also rehearsing what you want to say, especially as you're realizing I need to have a conversation with someone. Maybe it's about a past issue. Maybe it's about a current habit or pattern that's not really working for you. And you can't control how other people are going to respond to whatever it is that you say, but you can choose your words and practice staying calm, staying kind. You can think through, okay, well, when I say this, I'm really worried that they're going to respond like that. I'm really worried my husband's going to yell at me. I'm really worried my kids are going to laugh at me or throw something at me, or, what are you worried about? rehearse it, practice it. Think about, okay, well, if that happens, I could say this, I could do this. Your goal here is building a level of assertiveness to say what you need to say, to be honest about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what your opinions are, instead of being passive, but also instead of being aggressive. And again, if we circle back to that question of why are you particularly struggling with this? That's going to help you know, do you tend to lean toward passivity? I am just trying to avoid a fight at all costs, and so I'll say what I need to say. Or do you lean toward aggressiveness? I'm trying to keep my own temper under control, and so I'm not going to say this thing that I think is going to cause a big argument. So notice the feelings, pause, practice those emotion words, rehearse what you want to say. And then the fourth tip here, and this is really one of my favorites, it really helps me when I am noticing that kind of inner struggle. Like I'm feeling this thing, it's awkward, it's hard, I probably don't have it all figured out yet, and yet my husband wants to talk about it, or my kids just will not drop the subject, and the whining is getting on my nerves, and I'm in the heat of the moment. It's so helpful, tip number 4 here, to notice and comment on or put the spotlight on things that are good. A lot of times when we're in a pattern of passive aggressive communication, our brain and our heart is so focused on the negative. I'm mad about that, or I'm frustrated about that, or they don't understand me. And we're getting ourselves worked up in this negative cycle. But the more that you're refocusing your attention on what you're thankful for, things that are going well with your kids or in your marriage, things that make you happy, positive moments together, well, now that attention can't be on the negative stuff. The energy is not on those painful emotions. Again, you're not pretending that it's not there. You're just choosing, am I going to look at the apple or am I going to look at the banana? They're both there. They're both real. You get to decide which one am I going to focus my attention on. And we can do the same thing with elements of our communication or our relationships in our home. So noticing what's good and commenting on it, complimenting people about it, talking about it, sending a text message about it, noticing the good in the heat of the moment and just kind of day to day is going to start shifting your perspective and make those overwhelming emotions a little bit more balanced. Because instead of being all negative, 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 there's going to be more positive getting inserted in there, and you get more balance, and now the emotions are not quite as overwhelming. But number 5 here, because we're all going to have struggles at times in our communication with people, number 5 here is to pray, apologize, and try again. Don't get stuck in the pattern, especially if this has been a habit that you are regularly responding in a sarcastic way to someone or kind of brushing things under the rug. You're going to need to pray and ask God to help you. Ask for forgiveness from the person, but ask forgiveness also from the Lord. And know that the Lord is going to complete every good work that He has started in you. And He wants you to follow His word. He wants you to deal with issues before the sun goes down. He wants you to deal with issues before the devil has a foothold. He wants you to be truthful and honest and happy. And it can have a big impact to pray not just about the thing that's happening or the emotion that's happening, but the overall process, the overall goal of stopping passive aggressive communication. So ask for His help, apologize, and try again. Don't think that one struggle, one failure, one screw up is going to ruin everything that's happening in your home. And then number 6 here, this is a big picture thing, but work on your emotional control. And a lot of times passive aggressive behavior is linked with anger, and that's a very normal emotion. We saw it there in Ephesians 4. It's very clear in the Bible that anger itself is not the issue. It's not automatically a sin. There's the question of, well, what's the motivation in my heart? Why am I getting angry? And then the question of, what do I do with that anger? Am I speaking or behaving in a way that is a problem? And so if you're noticing wherever it is, you're uncomfortable with the emotion or with talking about it or with worrying about the other person's response and how that's going to play out over time, work on not just noticing those emotions, practicing talking about it, but managing them differently. We have a lot of episodes on the podcast in the past and coming up. We have resources on the website. There's especially a devotional on the website called Keep Your Cool, Mama, a 40-day devotional, helping you dive into scripture around emotional control. But notice, what are those emotions you are struggling with? When are they popping up? What's your kind of go-to response today? You can pray about that. You can work on that. You can try different things. There's a number of strategies that can help with that, but it's going to depend on you and your emotions. Is it anger or anxiety? Is it fear or stress? Maybe it's all of the above, but whatever your particular struggle is, those are things to work on more deeply. And again, I have some resources on the website, some freebies there, but also some devotionals specifically on communication, specifically on emotional control. Everyone is at a different point in what they need, even though we all have the same ultimate goal: to glorify the Lord with what our family relationships look like, to enjoy our marriage and our motherhood and our family life. And so I hope that some of these tips are helpful as you specifically think about passive aggressive communication. I'll just roll through them one more time. To notice your feelings and pause. Don't just react, just pause. Take a moment. To practice using emotion words to get more comfortable with it. To rehearse ahead of time what you want to say and how you're going to say it. To notice and spotlight what is good. To pray, apologize, and try again. And then to work on emotional control of whatever emotions it is that is really causing a problem for you personally. And you could dive deep into any one of these topics, but I hope that at least one or two of those tips might be hitting home for you. And make sure to circle back with us on Friday for a quick moment of prayer around what communication looks like in your home. And then next week, I believe we're diving into the topic of yelling at our kids, a popular one, not a fun topic, but a popular thing for us to struggle with, a common thing for us to struggle with and want to work through. And so that's where we're heading next week. Make sure to subscribe to the show if you haven't done that yet. And leave a review. That would be encouraging and wonderful. And share about it with a friend, all those normal things. But make sure to subscribe to the show so that you can hop back with us next week and grab those resources that would be helpful for you over at loveyourpeoplewell.com. So until then, hugs and blessings to you, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.